Welcome to A Century of Service, stories of Alberta's military history, sponsored by the South Alberta Light Horse Regimental Association. My name is Lieutenant Colonel retired Robert McKenzie, and with me today is Colonel van Weelderen and Brigade RSM Talty. And they are command in the Brigade RSM of 41 Brigade. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you here today, and you've spent the last 2 years as the command team for 41 Brigade. What were the challenges you had when you first went to 41 Brigade?
The biggest challenge that we faced was there was a new initiative started at the Army level, which is called Strengthening the Army Reserve. And this initiative was focused on, there were a number of pillars that they were trying to improve within the Army Reserve, one of which was growth, another was training and reducing the number of courses required to get from private to sergeant and from officer cadet to captain. On the growth side, the challenge had been for us that the Canadian Forces Recruiting Centre was responsible for the processing piece of recruiting our new soldiers. And the direction had been that we were to take over that processing piece, so we were given some new Class B positions, so full-time reserve positions, in order to manage the processing piece. And the units then could just simply continue focusing on attraction. So attracting new recruits and new applicants, passing them off to the processors, and then ultimately enrolling.
And what success did you have in that?
I think both of us agreed that it was a case of focused leadership. So if we continued, historically we try to do a little bit of everything, but it becomes difficult to do something very well. So we had to focus and prioritize our efforts within the brigade and the units within the brigade to attract as many recruits as we could, and then start the processing piece. So on the processing side, the successes we had was we grew, I think when we took over, we were about 1,250 strong within the brigade, within our 10 units. And we've just surpassed 1,700 in 3 years, 2.5 years.
And that
incredible growth.
That takes into account the people that got out. You replace those.
Yeah.
So you're not talking about a growth of 500. You're talking about a growth of 700-800.
That's right. We've been at this now for coming up to 3 years. We started really, the heavy push was kind of that late 2016 timeframe. And we were recruiting on average 300, 350 per year, and enrolling new soldiers. And now the next tranche, for my successor, will be training. Because there is now a huge remit. Of the privates, I would say probably 90% are not trade qualified. And we need to run them. We need to run the courses and do that. And so the long-term trick here is that we've been so focused on recruiting and individual training, running these formal courses, that now we need to make sure we continue to have the collective training piece, which is the exercises, actually mastering our trades in the field. And that is suffering right now, where we're starting to see our junior leaders, our master corporals, etc., and sergeants always teaching and not getting the experiential phase of collective training. So yeah, it's a big ask.
So how long have you been commander of 41 Brigade?
We took over as a brigade command team I took over in August, late August of 2016, and Mr. Talty took over as assumed the brigade sergeant major billet in, I think it was October or November of 2015, almost a year before me.
Okay.
November 15.
Yeah.
So you've had quite a bit of success. We've interviewed the brigade sergeant major. I'd just like to go into a little bit of your background. Sure. How did you reach the exalted rank of commander of 41 Brigade?
Right. Well, I joined in 1986. There was a program called the Summer Youth Employment Program, and I joined under that, which really was a summer job. And if you wanted to, you could then join the reserves after that was over. And I joined with the Signal Squadron in Calgary, loved it, and then transferred over and joined the reserves afterwards. became a lineman, so a telephone lineman equivalent, but within the military. Very much focused on the field side. So although our bases have linemen as well that manage all the telecommunications there, I was focused on the field side. Took the courses, got promoted to Master Corporal, was the line construction foreman within the squadron in Calgary. During this process, I was going through university and got my civil engineering degree. And after I got my degree, then I transferred over to the Combat Engineer Squadron and took my commission with them. Went up through command of the squadron from 2003 to 2006, then got promoted to Lieutenant Colonel and actually taught on the Militia Command and Staff course.
That's a course that through Kingston.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's broken down into 3 phases. The first 2, it's a year-long course. The first 2 are actually done remotely, and so out of Edmonton. And then it culminates in 2 weeks in Kingston. And so I taught on there for 2 years, and during that time frame, there have been discussions about the independent squadron in Calgary and the engineer regiment in Edmonton merging. And so they asked me to come back and be the first commanding officer of that new amalgamated unit called 41 Combat Engineer Regiment. And I commanded that from 2008 to 2011, at which time I then transitioned over to brigade and was in charge of the battle school for a couple of years, then deputy commander of the brigade until 2016
now,
when I
you've
took over
taken
command.
some interesting courses in other countries in your time in.
Yeah, well, the one that really stands out is after I did my Militia Command and Staff College in 2003, fortunately I'd done well enough that I was given the nod to attend the New Zealand Grade 2 Territorial Staff course. So effectively it's a course for captains going to major, and it was fantastic. So 3 weeks to New Zealand in early 2006, and that's a good little army.
Yeah.
So very impressed. Yep.
And then you took a few other courses. And you took the joint Canadian Forces Joint Command and Staff program.
I did. So that's a course that's required for promotion to colonel in the reserves. And so it's another year-long course, much like the Militia Command and Staff course.
Is it full-time?
Part-time. It culminates again in 2 weeks, but this time in Toronto at the Canadian Forces College. And I took that course in 2012 to 13.
What's involved in that course?
Primarily, you're looking where in the Militia Command and Staff course, you're looking at Army operations at the unit/battle group level and into brigade level. Here, you're looking at joint. So you're looking at Army, Navy, Air operations, including Special Forces and so.
And just to summarize, I gather you co-authored a book in 2017.
I did. In the early 2000s, I came upon a book by a former commander of 2 Canadian Mechanized Brigade Group, General Ernie Bino. And he had written a book called Training Canada's Army, which I found fascinating. And it really was a little pocketbook, a little ring-bound pocketbook that I found as an incredible resource for me during my periods of command, but it was very regular force centric. So what I felt, and I felt strongly about, and I have always felt strongly about, is collective training in the Army Reserve units at kind of the section, platoon, company/squadron level. And I've got some pretty strong feelings on how to achieve successes in those. So in 2015, when I was the deputy commander of the brigade, I approached General Bino and asked him if he had since retired. He was the honorary colonel with the 7th Field Regiment of the Royal Canadian Artillery out of Toronto. And we agreed to collaborate on an update of the book, but have it focused exclusively on Army Reserve collective training. And this book is actually available for a free download on Amazon.com.
And it's called Training for War, Collective Training in Canadian Army Reserve.
It is. Army Reserve units, you're right, Rob.
Yeah. Well, that could be a resource for anybody who's interested.
Very much, very much, and I hope it is. I've
how,
had some good feedback.
How amenable was General Bino to doing this?
Oh, incredibly so. I think he really enjoyed his time as the honorary colonel, and very much enjoyed working with the reserves. So for him to be able to continue to pass on his thoughts on training to a newer audience, he was very excited about. And it was fun collaborating. You know, we're doing it from a distance. He lives in Kingston. There I am in Calgary, and so it's lots of...
Got on Skype or
primarily email.
email?
Yeah, and about 20 revisions of the book.
Oh.
So just going back and forth, tweaking this, adding that.
Did you have any other colonels that you
We ended up
collaborated with?
we ended up getting a bit of a review committee after
Yeah.
kind of our final draft was done, and we had probably about 10 senior officers review the book across Canada. So just people we knew that we
Yeah.
knew were similar-minded about training, and so it was good to get their feedback.
Is it a reference book for the courses at Kingston now?
My understanding is that they're handing out the booklet as to the Army Operations Course, which is the new name for the Militia Command and Staff course.
Yeah.
So, which is awesome. I'm glad.
Yeah.
It's good to see kind of that next generation being able to,
And
to
that
learn a little
wasn't
bit.
the first book you wrote either.
Well, I had done an update on it was called Green Route Up, which was a book that the divisional engineers had written in World War II. And this was the 4th Canadian Division Engineers, of which one of the squadrons was the squadron, the predecessor of the squadron that I commanded in the early 2000s. And so there were only a few copies of this hardcover book around because it was just a memento, a kind of a war memento to those guys who served in the Div Engineers. And so as a departure gift when I left the squadron, I just kind of retyped that book in and then just made sure it was, and then resourced it, put in a proper table of contents and also an index at the back, just to make sure it was a useful tool so it could be broadly disseminated, because there's so many lessons to be learned from what those Div engineers went through. Things haven't changed. Our job in the engineers.
If you don't learn from the past,
Exactly. You're doomed to repeat.
Yeah.
Right.
You
And
do
so,
make
I think
the
it
same
was
mistakes.
it was fun. It was fun kind of learning what they had gone through. So.
Okay. Now we talked about the reserve recruiting that you feel is one of your big accomplishments. What other challenges faced you as a command team in 41 Brigade?
I would say probably one of the biggest ones is time. We are Army reservists, so where do you focus your efforts? I think we were very fortunate during our tenure of command to have a fantastic support insofar as a great deputy commander, Lieutenant Colonel Mike Vernon, who is taking over from me as the next commander of the brigade. He looked after the recruiting and the processing piece on my behalf, and coordinated all that support. Our Chief of Staff, Lieutenant Colonel Steve Jodry, is a regular force officer from the Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry. His background was he was a former base commander of Base Shiloh, and a number of other appointments, including RSS, or regular support staff to a reserve unit. He understands the reserves. We have a fantastic staff at the headquarters itself, and so that all allowed Mr. Talty and I to actually break away from the headquarters, knowing they were running day-to-day operations, and focus on future planning and getting out and visiting the units. And we have 10 units that are spread over 6 garrison cities. So it's important that we get out and see them both in the field and within the armories themselves.
And during your tenure, one of the things that you established a subunit in Yellowknife.
Long before me.
Yeah.
Long before me.
Okay.
So that was, I think, established in, I'm going to say, at least 10 years ago,
okay.
maybe 2008. And so that's now Charlie Company, or C Company of the Loyal Edmonton Regiment.
Okay.
That's up in Yellowknife.
And I understand you were up there in February.
We were there for a visit in February, during the cold, as they were doing some excellent training, actually. Yeah, on a field exercise.
The reason I know that, I was with Chris Barr.
Okay.
In Edmonton, and he got back from that. We both arrived in Edmonton at the same time, and he mentioned that you were up there.
Yeah.
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 Okay, what other challenges faced you, like the professional development training within the brigade? Did you spend much time on that?
We do. I mean, as at the brigade level, we have one professional development exercise every year. We normally hold in February. And it's really up to the commander and the command team to choose what we're going to focus on those exercises. In the past, we flew General Bino in order to really continue to develop and pull from him as to his thoughts on training, etc. And we had Colonel Ian Hope, a former commander of a Canadian task force over in Afghanistan, provide his thoughts on training for combat. So we've had those types of exercises this past year. We had breakout sessions where the brigade sergeant major took all of the senior non-commissioned members within the brigade and conducted his professional development training. And the topics on that were primarily?
It was leadership based. So, you know, it's going back to basics is what I wanted to do, was just, you know, like we talk a lot of strategic stuff and, you know, command teams talk about op planning and then getting a lot of the, you know, the mundane admin, which is really what can kill any organization, but the Army Reserve especially. You have 5 days worth of administration to fit into a 3-hour Wednesday, right? So it's critical that we approach it disciplined. And so, you know, how do you break out a whole year's worth of admin? Well, that can be mapped out, a lot of it, and then, but if you don't talk about it, it just becomes not done, I guess, is what the problem is.
I also found out that increasing the sharing between units and how they solve problems
exactly.
that is a key. There's too much reinventing the wheel.
That's right. So I went back to duty with honor, honed in on those chapters, and just quickly went over it and reminded them, because when I became the brigade sergeant major, that was the first thing I did with the regimental sergeant majors was, these are the expectations from me to you, just so you know that's what I'm looking for. And it was, you know, lead from the front and all those basic principles. So,
how important is the relationship between the commander and his brigade RSM?
Brigade sergeant major, yeah, it's critical. I think a good relationship based on trust and communication is critical. We spend a lot of time together. And frankly, every time, because I'm based in Calgary, every time we leave to go to Edmonton, Mr. Talty drives from Medicine Hat to Calgary, so he spends 3 hours ahead of any weekend, and at the end, he's driving 3 hours home. So for a reserve lifestyle, it's a lot of extra miles.
Well, knowing both of you for years, I think you're both fortunate to have each other.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
And
it's not the first time I was a sergeant major for anyone. You know, I've been a soldier for a long time, but you know, as you go through your career in the Army, you know, you work for some excellent people and you work for some not excellent people, and so there's a lot of examples, but really we're not two old men looking at stuff, but there's a lot of years of experience sitting in the back seat of that vehicle as we were driving to places like Edmonton or Lethbridge or back to Medicine Hat, where, I mean, we're just looking at situations and going, okay, well, what happened there, and breaking it down. I mean, without
communication.
If you're alone, then it's always about what you think, not necessarily someone else saying, well, don't forget. And that comment goes a long way in a command team, right?
Well, I also find out that a brigade sergeant major is like an RSM. You basically have one boss.
That's right.
And which
I only
makes
work
it
for
easy,
one man. Yeah.
Unlike the colonel, who has a few bosses pulling.
Primarily the division commander.
Yeah.
Right. Much like 41 Brigade has a deputy commander, so does division, and we're responsive to the deputy commander, but we're responsible to the division commander, and then the division commander in turn is responsible to the commander of the Army. So, yeah, it works. I mean, the structure works, and I think one of the things that works quite well is hard ends, where I think, you know, based on my civilian career, you know, it's difficult sometimes to leave a senior appointment when you're in charge.
Yeah.
But in the military, there's always hard ends. There's always changes of command.
Yeah.
And that actually is a benefit. So
In some ways a benefit, in some ways it screws everything up for a while.
it does as you get new, but that's
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
that's about the transition of command.
Yeah.
And so within our brigade, for example, this past year, every year we have to write an op plan or an operating plan on how we're going to execute next year, how we're going to take the public monies and actually achieve something with those, based on what's been tasked to us. Well, this past year, our deputy commander, Lieutenant Colonel Mike Vernon, wrote the op plan because he's the one executing it.
Yeah.
So there's no point in having me write the op plan, only for him then to have to do a hard left or right turn if he disagrees with something that I'm proposing.
But he
'Cause
did consult with you on it.
100%.
Because, yeah.
100%. It's still my responsibility to ensure it's done within the arcs that are given to me by General Cadu, the commander of the division.
Yeah. Now, we had celebrated the end of the Afghan conflict in 5 year. I think it's been 5 years since Canada withdrew troops from Afghanistan. But I understand you went over there as a lieutenant colonel.
I did, yeah, in 2011.
And what was your
Or
job
2010,
there?
yeah.
Yeah, 2010.
So, yeah, in 2010. So I was a senior staff officer working at the ISAF Joint Command Headquarters, which was in Kabul, at the North Airfield in Kabul. And so I worked underneath the chief engineer, who supported the 3-star American general, whose role was looking after the entire theater. And during that time was interesting because there was a 30,000 soldier surge that President Obama was pushing into the country in order to achieve certain things. And so what we were looking at was primarily every region within, then there were 5 regions within Afghanistan that had been carved up into by NATO for administration, et cetera. To ensure that the accommodations within those regions and all the planning and engineering that was happening could actually accommodate those.
Well, we talked about how logistics is so important, and engineers are one of the means of achieving the logistic goals.
Yeah.
And so how did you find out going over as a reservist, working with the regular force and working with the Americans?
I didn't find it. What I found interesting, I think, was national stereotypes. That really stood out to me. And so Canadians tend to kind of fit with both the Americans, with the Five Eyes, so the US, Britain, Australia, New Zealand, and also with the Europeans. And the national stereotypes were, it almost seemed to be magnified. So Americans were more American. They were hardworking. That was an American effort, and they did the heavy lifting. And then, I remember going up to visit Mazar Sharif. And there was a base nearby, a NATO base called Camp Marmal. And it was primarily German run. There were a few other nations that were there as well, and the Americans were there too. But for example, the mess hall, it looked like an IKEA showroom because it was very German. And then you go over to, I had a luxury of visiting over to Herat, which was the Italians and the Spaniards. And I mean, the Italians were very Italian. So, espressos, you name it. So it was neat to see, and I very much enjoyed it. It was very much an experience that it was my only mission that I was able to go on, and that was in year 24. Before that, I'd never had the opportunity to deploy because my civilian life was such that I couldn't break away. And here was a perfect opportunity. So
you enjoyed your tour over there and learned a lot.
I did. Yeah, excellent experience.
Had an appreciation of how it's like running a city. How many troops were in?
I think it was about 130,000 troops.
So it's like managing
total.
a city. The engineers managing a city of 130,000
Well,
spread out over
that's
the
right.
whole country.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is quite a challenge.
It was. Yeah.
Yeah. I wonder what's happened to a lot of that infrastructure that was over there.
I know. It would be interesting to go back and see, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Although that's not one country I would want to visit. Now, you mentioned your civilian employment. You're president of 2, and I've heard them described as boutique.
Yeah, 2 small boutique consultancies. So one is an engineering project management consulting firm, so called Falling Apple Solutions. And yeah, we just kind of jump from contract to contract on that. So it's nice because it's very simple.
What sort of contracts are you involved with?
So
in
primarily engineering, project management. So whether it's provincial government, whether it's private corporations, wherever we can find that there's a need, then we just put teams together and address those needs, and it's worked out well.
So you hire people in. You
I
have
do.
a small core.
Yeah, we just build teams as we need them. And then the other company we have is a company called Well in North America, and what we do there is we track political risk.
Oh.
So I won't talk too much about it while I'm in uniform. But you can Google it.
Now, is there anything you wish you would have done? You're coming up. We're about 2 months ahead of you turning over command to.
Yeah, to Lieutenant Colonel
Mike
Mike Vernon.
Vernon.
You're
Yeah.
right. Is there anything that I think is left? No. It's been fantastic. I think we've really embraced command, and we identified early on where we wanted to make the big hits and what we wanted to do, and we were very fortunate that the timing with the Army and their initiative to grow the reserves completely aligned with our desire to do the same thing.
You mentioned a general higher up in Ottawa, General
Wenick.
Wenick.
Yeah, General Paul Wenick was the Army commander when I assumed command of the brigade. He's now the Vice Chief of the Defense Staff.
Okay.
But during his time, it was his vision that created the Strengthening the Army Reserves Initiative
Because
at the Army level.
That's always been the problem. We recognize the problem at a lower level, but we couldn't get anybody to buy in that, yes, that's a problem, and here's how we're going to solve it.
Yeah, and it was his vision and his persistence that this was the route he wanted, and he made it his priority. And then it came down to where now growing the Army Reserve was priority 2 at 3rd Canadian Division, right after force generation and executing operations. So, I mean, the Army Reserve had never been that high up on the priority list. So it was fantastic for us, and we just grabbed onto that and leveraged it.
Colonel, how has your family supported you in your military endeavors?
I think family support is critical. I don't think that we can be successful in the Army Reserve without a strong family behind you, because there's so much time that's pulled away. In fact, last year I was doing the calculations, and I spent there were 160 days in uniform for a part-time job. So that's a lot of weekends away, a lot of evenings, sometime during the work day. Unfortunately, I've got my own company, so I had that flexibility to do it. But that's half a work year for a part-time job.
Yeah.
And obviously it's not that level of commitment at the private soldier level, but being pulled away from family obligations in order to serve your country is a big ask. And so you need to have that family support. So for my wife, Susan, it's been incredible. So for her to be there supporting and taking care of a lot of stuff so that I could serve has been incredible for me.
Now, what is your aim after you retire, or after you give up your term as brigade commander?
So this June I'll be handing off command to Lieutenant Colonel Vernon, and then a week later I'll be retiring from the forces. So it's been an incredible experience to date, and after 33 years of service, I think it's time. And I'm looking forward to retirement. I'm looking forward to re-engaging and going camping and doing all those things with Susan that I didn't have the liberties to do over the past number of years.
And is she looking forward to that too?
Partially, I think. I think she's also got used to her freedom.
Being home too.
That's right.
Now, this question is for both of you. How do you feel that belonging to the military has influenced you both personally and professionally in your civilian careers?
Well, I think the courses and the training that we undertake in the military are such that early on we get exposed to basic leadership principles, and we get to practice those within a very safe environment, which is the militia unit. And then ultimately, for example, with me, That preceded any leadership opportunities I had within the engineering consulting company that I worked with. So by the time I was a senior project manager or managing a department, I was already an experienced leader within the military. And I was able to completely transfer those skills across to my civilian employment. And the other benefit on the reserve side is it is a volunteer organization. If you're a poor leader on the reserves, then the soldiers aren't coming out. If you can't convince them, because you need to lead with a carrot, not the stick on the reserve side. And so the skills are very much something that can transition across cleanly to your civilian employment. That's been a huge benefit to me.
I found a big difference too is that there's more leadership involved in a reserve unit than almost in a regular force unit, due to the fact that the regular force guy can't tell you goodbye
Right.
right away.
Yeah, that's right.
Where the reservist, if you don't treat them right and if they aren't getting something out of their employment, they're out the door.
That's right. Well, and what's interesting too on the leadership side in the reserves is that the new recruit compared to the senior corporal, compared to an experienced warrant officer or a captain, they all have different priorities. Some are looking for excitement, some are looking for stable and predictable training, and you've got to be able to feed every one of those to make sure you keep them engaged and they don't walk.
And the thing is, you have to enable them to walk away for a while, because they reach certain times in their personal life.
That's right.
That, they have to walk away, but don't make it. Don't make the break so they don't want to come back.
That's right.
And that's something that I think is very important to recognize.
It's a misconception that if the training's hard, the reservist will walk away. That's not the case ever. It's when it becomes so administratively cumbersome that it's not worth his time. It's not the hard work or the challenge. That's why they joined. It's when it becomes so burdened down with policy and administration that that bores people. They get enough of that in their daytime job. So they when they want what they joined the reserves for is the actual, the challenging training, the hard to do job. So it's not the level of hard that's going to make them not show up. So,
Mr. Talty, think back to when you joined, went from the KOCR to the regular force. What did you notice about that transition?
That's a funny one. So I joined when I was 16. I left when I was 20, left the reserves and joined the regular army. Of course, the regular army has always looked down on the reserves as not good enough and all that. So mum's the word, didn't tell anyone where I came from, and I just showed up. And it was interesting that after about half a year in the regular army, you can see who's who and who the movers and shakers are within small units and larger chunks of it. And standing around the smoking area one day, and we're just goofing around, and someone let it slip that they were in a reserve unit out east. And I was like, oh, you were in the reserves? And you start to look around, and every one of us had been in the reserves, in the militia. So it's because it's what we wanted to do, right? But we were proactively looking to make it better, always, right? And
your son almost followed the same.
He did, he's in Latvia right now, actually. He's Master Corporal in the 12e Régiment Blindé du Canada. So
he's following after you in that way. You served in that unit too, after your French training. And how's he enjoying that?
He's loving it.
Yeah.
He's always wanted to be in the Army, so that's good. Of 3 children, he's the middle, and he's the one who always wanted to be in the military, so good for him.
One of the things during your tenure of command is the interaction with the civilian community. What sort of things happened during your tenure that enabled you to interact with the communities?
Well, every one of our units has a remit to connect with Canadians and connect with Albertans, specifically within our area. Now, the reserves are very well placed for this because we are dispersed across Canada in probably over 100 communities or more. And so where the regular force has been centralized into large bases like Wainwright and Edmonton, and then I guess obviously further east as well, the reserves are still community based. And so during our tenure, what we did was we looked ahead and we said, well, what are the big events? And obviously we've got the centenary of all the centenaries within World War I that were superimposed on our tenure in command. So we had the 100th anniversary of Vimy. We had the 100th anniversary of the end of the Great War. And those were two where for the Vimy parades, every garrison was to hold a parade. And to get out into the public eye and definitely commemorate what was a founding battle for this country. And so Mr. Talty and I took part in a number of those parades, one of the key ones being the one in Calgary. And then for the end of the Great War, we wanted to do something a little different. We knew that Edmonton, with one brigade, the Regular Force Brigade and the division headquarters, was already well represented. And our home station for the brigade is Calgary. So we had we ended up having a large garrison Remembrance Day parade this past Remembrance Day. And it was fantastic. Every unit was represented with a guard. And then the remainder of the unit would go to their traditional locations because it was important for that significant commemoration event that all those hundreds of communities do have representation by soldiers.
Okay, is there anything else you would like to add? As we're
Moisturizer?
Yeah.
No moisturizer.
No, I sure appreciate you agreeing to be interviewed, and I think there's a lot of information that has come out of this. Now, as you turn over, I gather you're fairly happy with the condition or what you turn over in the brigade, because you've made it a lot better through working together and cooperating with the Army in that.
Well, thanks.
And there's a direction for it to go now.
Yeah.
Now, Colonel Vernon's going to have to concentrate on the not the individual training, but the collective training.
Both individual and collective training. And one of the probably the one thing that we've had the most difficulty, our biggest hurdle in during our tenure at command is increasing the number of master corporals and sergeants. That junior leadership level is so critical for us because we've, those master corporals are, the kind of the coal face of leadership. They're required to teach courses. They're required to attract new applicants. They're the key, whether it's section commanders, detachment commanders, in order to do collective training. They've got to get their own experience so they can get promoted up. We have very few. We weren't able to make a significant dent in growing that capability for our junior leaders. And frankly, I think during peacetime operations, that is the most important thing we can do, is to train the next crop of leaders.
And one of the problems is it's never recognized, is that the reserves are a significant resource for the regular force, and yet we don't get recognized. What we do is training junior leaders and that type of thing, and we just get them up to where they become very useful within a unit, and then they join the regular force, which is part of our mandate.
Yeah, well, I don't know if it's our mandate is not to be a recruiting pool for the regular force, but I think that there are awesome opportunities for those of our part-time soldiers who wish to transition to full-time service. It is hard. It causes difficulties at the reserve force unit when you lose a crop of junior leaders, and now you've got to rebuild that, and it takes years to rebuild that. But the Army writ large benefits from the hard work that we do at the reserve unit level to create leaders. As we do on the regular force, because we do have some regular force soldiers who come back and not necessarily when they're senior. It could be master corporals as well, and corporals who just decide that they're going to release from the regular force and transfer to the reserves. It is difficult. It hurts, right? It hurts when you're in a small unit and you lose 10, 15, 20% of your junior leaders. But we always learn to get by, and we just have to tailor our expectations, whether it's on the individual training side or the collective training side, and just make decisions accordingly.
What success have you had in reducing the requirements? For example, to become a lieutenant, to go from coming in to become a troop leader,
Right.
is 34 weeks
Yeah.
training, which, unless you're in university, is darn near impossible.
Yeah. One of the things we've attempted to do was really push our units to look at the demographics that they're recruiting, because the magic number is the magic is the high school student who can then go through training during university, post-secondary, whatever it is,
Yeah.
such that just before they start their civilian life, they're now trained up. General Wenick realized this, and with the Strengthening the Army Reserves initiatives, where one of his pillars was reducing the training time. And so his direction to the Canadian Army Doctrine and Training Center was, let's shorten the courses such that we can get a soldier qualified from private to sergeant in 4 years. Doesn't mean they'll be promoted to the sergeant, but at least they'll be qualified. So then the experiential piece can take over. We can promote them as required, but the training piece is done.
And that also fits in with the guaranteed employment during the summer.
That's right, the full-time summer employment. Yeah,
Has that been a fairly successful
it
program?
has been. And we're entering year number 2 on that now. And I think 6,000 soldiers took advantage of it across Canada last year. So it's been fantastic. It's really the militia that I joined,
Yes.
where there was employment for you all summer, and they bridged between different contracts. So it works.
And I think that both benefits the regular force and the reserves.
Yeah,
Because the reserves can start taking over more responsibility
yeah.
for their own training. You're commander of 41 Brigade. What composes 41 Brigade, and what centers are they at?
For sure. 41 Brigade has, and its former incarnations as districts and other brigades have been around since 1905. And really it's an administrative grouping in order to provide command and control over a number of reserve units that are spread across, in this case, Alberta. Currently we have 10 units. The brigade is composed of a brigade headquarters, which helps us command the brigade. It's made of about 65 full-time staff. And then there are 9 units, militia or reserve units, spread over 6 garrison cities. So we have 2 armored units, the South Alberta Light Horse and the King's Own Calgary Regiment. We have 2 artillery units, the 20th Field Regiment, Royal Canadian Artillery, and the 20th Independent Field Battery out of Lethbridge. An engineer regiment, 41 Combat Engineer Regiment, 41 Signal Regiment, 2 infantry units, the Loyal Edmonton Regiment and the Calgary Highlanders, and we have 41 Service Battalion. And we're actually fortunate this time as well, because attached under operational command to us is 15th Field Ambulance, which are is part of the Medical Corps.
So, and they're in all the major cities plus Yellowknife.
That's right.
Well, I should say the major cities: Edmonton, Red Deer, Calgary, Medicine Hat, Lethbridge.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And many of our units actually are located in multiple cities. So, for example, the Lowell Edmonton Regiment has the company in Yellowknife. 20th Field Regiment, as an artillery unit, has a battery, a battery in Edmonton and a battery in Red Deer. So that in itself creates a complexity for a part-time commanding officer.
And the South Alberta Light Horse has.
And the South Alberta Light Horse is one of the largest distances
Yeah.
to travel, which is Medicine Hat, where the regiment is home stationed. However, the commanding officer is currently in Edmonton.
And we also have a subunit in Lethbridge.
That's right.
Well,
which
the
was
only
established.
unit that is in one city is the Calgary Highlanders and 20th Independent in Lethbridge and in Calgary. But all the other units in the brigade, of the 10 units, there's multiple locations. So
Which, and they're trying to expand some of them.
that's right.
Always constant thought to that.
Yeah.
Okay, within the unit to establish the esprit de corps within all the units, you reestablished the Grizzly Cup. Can you explain what that is?
For sure. So the Grizzly Cup is a trophy that we award annually for unit proficiency. And so it's up to the commanders of the day to determine what the criteria will be for proficiency, what's important. And so for us, it was growth. It was basic soldier skills. It was ensuring, maximizing the number of our soldiers that were ready for deployment administratively. And so we tracked those statistics, and then as of a certain date, then we determined whichever units was most proficient across those statistics, and then we would award the cup accordingly. And so we're very fortunate that the Lieutenant Governor has actually agreed that we will be replacing the Grizzly Cup with a Lieutenant Governor's Cup for unit proficiency. And so she has procured a suitable device, and we will be presenting it to the most proficient unit. It'll be Colonel Vernon upon promotion, who will be doing that when he next awards the trophy for proficiency within 41 Canadian Brigade Group.
What other interactions do you have with the civilians? I know the opening of the legislature.
Yep. Yeah, you're right, Robert. So what I've tried to do at the brigade level is very much focus on brigade level activities. And Alberta, like provincial level activities, because our units are spread over the major cities within Alberta, I really wanted those commanding officers to be front and center and not to usurp them by somehow coming in and taking over with a large event. And so one of the key aspects that I felt it was important to be at was the speech from the throne and to be part of the Vice Regal Escort. It's an honor that's normally presented within Alberta to the commander of 3rd Canadian Division. And both General Hetherington and now General Cadieux have been excellent about allowing me to represent the Army as part of the Vice Regal Escort. And so we've done that for a couple of years now. And hopefully it's something that carries on. In addition, I was very, very fortunate to be asked to be the honorary parade marshal for the Medicine Hat Stampede, which was a fantastic event. And and Susan was able to join me on that. So the city and the Stampede, fantastic hosts, and it was great to bring greetings from the Army for the tremendous support that this city has continued to show to the South Alberta Light Horse. And frankly, the entire Army.
With the Stampede Company next door, they have assisted us off and on throughout the years with no questions asked. What do you need? No cost.
That's right.
It's,
I just find it's a can-do attitude, and it works tremendously well. So, it was a tremendous honor.
That is absolutely fantastic. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us today. And thank you for joining us for this edition of A Century of Service.